Hi viewers, welcome back to Silent Case, where forgotten questions return and old files breathe again. Tonight's story pulls us back to 1974. Inside a sealed classroom where a teacher and a student vanished in a single impossible moment. After 47 years, that door has opened again. Subscribe and watch the full story now. On a rain-soaked Thursday afternoon, October 17, 1974, the final bell echoed through Bradley High School, its metallic ring dissolving into the long, empty corridors. Students drifted out into the gray, misty parking lot, jackets pulled over their heads, the sound of sneakers slapping against puddles fading into the hum of idling buses. In most classrooms, lights snapped off one by one. But room 12, tucked at the far end of the English wing, stayed lit. Inside sat Daniel Cole, a quiet, sharp-eyed 15-year-old who rarely spoke unless called upon. He lingered behind his desk, fingers drumming the cover of his literature notebook. His teacher, Ms. Evelyn Hart, stood near the chalkboard, gently erasing the last remnants of a lesson on classic tragedies. She paused occasionally, watching Daniel with the kind of subtle, attentive care that only a devoted teacher carries. "I don't mind staying late," Evelyn said softly, noticing his hesitation. "But you look like something's weighing on you." Daniel didn't answer at first. Instead, he glanced at the door closed, locked as always after school hours, and then at the rain streaking the window like thin silver wires. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked slightly. "Someone's been following me." Evelyn's hand froze over the chalk tray. "Who?" Daniel gave a faint shake of his head. "I don't know. I just hear footsteps. In the halls. Even during lunch. I thought I saw someone near the stairwell yesterday, but when I looked again, nobody." The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing in a low rhythmic hum. Evelyn kept her voice steady. "If someone is bothering you, we'll handle it. You're not alone in this, Daniel." He let out a slow breath, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. At 4:03 p.m., the hallway camera, one of the few in the building, caught a glimpse of the school custodian, Arthur Briggs, pushing his mop cart past room 12. He later recalled hearing murmurs inside, Evelyn's calm tone overlapping with the boy's anxious replies. Briggs didn't think much of it then. Teachers often tutored after hours. At 4:12 p.m., the rain intensified, hammering the windows with a steady, stormy rhythm. Evelyn walked to her desk, preparing to pack her papers away. Daniel stood to leave, though reluctantly. Then came the sound. A faint, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles brushing against a wall or a locker door being tested. Daniel's face went pale. Evelyn stiffened. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "That's the sound. It follows me." She walked toward the door cautiously, heels silent on the linoleum floor. She turned the handle gently, locked, as it should be. But something felt wrong. Evelyn backed away from the door, her breath shallow. "Let's finish up here. I'll walk you out once we're done." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Minutes passed quietly. The tapping didn't return. Evelyn wrote a short list of books on the board recommendations for Daniel's essay while he scribbled in his notebook. Briggs passed by one last time, hearing Evelyn's voice say something that he later swore sent a chill down his spine. "Just keep calm. We'll leave together." At 4:17 p.m., the wall clock above the window stopped ticking. No one noticed it in that moment. By the time Briggs made his final sweep at 4:30 p.m., the hallway outside room 12 was silent, the rain muffled to a distant whisper. He paused, knocked lightly on the door, and called out, "Ms. Hart?" "Locking up now." No response. He tried the handle. Still locked from the inside. Assuming the two had already stepped out through another exit, Briggs wheeled his cart away. The building fell into deep evening quiet, the storm gradually fading, leaving only the occasional drip from the aging roof gutters. The next morning, October 18th, 7:01 AM history. Teacher arriving early unlocked the English wing. She passed room 12, noticing the door slightly ajar, even though it had been locked the previous night. Curious, she pushed it open fully and froze. The room was immaculate. Desks untouched. Chairs neatly aligned. No sign of Evelyn. No sign of Daniel. Only the chalkboard, where a single sentence, written in trembling handwriting, waited like a warning etched into stone. Don't open the door. And behind the teacher's desk, the small classroom clock still read 4:17 p.m., as if time itself had refused to move forward. The investigation that would haunt the town for nearly 5 decades had just begun. ****. The discovery in room 12 spread through Bradley High School before first period even began. Teachers whispered in clusters. Students stared down the hallway with uneasy fascination, and the principal's voice cracked over the intercom as he asked everyone to remain calm. But calm was impossible. After all, the room where Ms. Evelyn Hart and Daniel Cole had last been seen was found spotless, its clock frozen at 4:17 p.m., a warning scrawled on the board, and no trace of either person. Detectives arrived before sunrise, led by Detective Samuel Rourke, a man known for his patience and his skepticism of anything that sounded strange. Yet even he hesitated before stepping into room 12, as if the air inside carried a tension that didn't belong in a school. The crime scene technician moved slowly, snapping photographs of the chalkboard, the neat row of desks, and the unbroken windows streaked with leftover rain. A measuring tape flicked open, gliding across the room. "No forced entry," one officer muttered. "No exit either," another replied. Detective Rourke pressed his thumb against the inside lock. The mechanism was fully functional. To leave the room and lock it from the inside, someone would need to stay behind. But Evelyn and Daniel were both gone. Rourke stood beneath the frozen clock. 4:17 p.m. That's when whatever happened. He walked toward the far wall, placing his palm against the cool paint. If someone came in, we'd see it. If someone left, we'd see it. The unsettling silence deepened as investigators pulled Daniel's notebook from his desk. They spotted a page near the back, ink smudged, written with a trembling hand. One line repeated 3 times. "He's watching." Rourke exhaled slowly. "Who is he?" Meanwhile, officers interviewed students gathered in the cafeteria. Emily Porter, who sat 2 rows behind Daniel in English, recalled that he'd seemed distracted all week, glancing at the door every few minutes. "He looked scared," she whispered, "like he was expecting someone to walk in." Another student claimed Evelyn had been on edge, frequently checking the windows during class. The secretary confirmed that Evelyn requested to change her parking spot twice that month. Something or someone had unsettled them both. By mid-afternoon, investigators tested every route in and out of room 12. Windows were sealed tight. The vent shaft was barely wide enough for an arm. The door had no damage, no tampering marks. Every surface felt untouched. It was as though the room had simply swallowed 2 people whole. Detective Rourke stood in the hallway, staring at the polished brass numbers bolted to the door. 12. Either they left on their own without being seen, he murmured, or they never left at all. The janitor, Arthur Briggs, was brought in next. He recounted the faint murmurs he heard the previous evening and admitted he'd knocked before locking up. "Sounded calm," Briggs said. "The teacher was speaking, the boy listening. Nothing strange." Rourke leaned forward. "Did you hear anything else?" Briggs hesitated. "Maybe a tapping?" "Hard to say. Thought it was the pipes." From his coat pocket, Rourke pulled out a small keychain holding several schoolmaster keys. "Briggs, your set is complete, right?" "Yes, sir. No missing keys?" "None." Yet the more officers inspected room 12, the less everything made sense. As the sun dipped behind the school, casting long shadows through the empty hallways, a CSI tech reviewing early audio recordings from the corridor microphone called out, "Detective, you need to hear this." The playback began with silence, just the soft drone of rain from the night before. Then, faintly something else, a shuffle, a low whisper, a short sudden thump coming from inside room 12 at approximately 4:19 p.m., 2 minutes after the clock had stopped. Rourke stared at the speaker. But the room was empty. He replayed the clip again. The sound repeated, unmistakably human and disturbingly close. If Evelyn and Daniel vanished before the room was found empty, then who made the noise 2 minutes later? Or worse, what? Rourke stepped back into the hallway, his gaze fixed on the closed classroom door. The mystery of the sealed room wasn't just unexplained, it was impossible. And impossibilities, in cold cases, were the first sign of something far more disturbing beneath the surface. Detective Rourke left room 12 with the disturbing audio still echoing in his mind, the shuffle, the whisper, the thump that occurred after the clock had stopped and after both Evelyn and Daniel were already gone. Whatever happened inside that classroom did not end at 4:17 p.m. By the next morning, Bradley High School transformed from a place of learning into a controlled search perimeter. Patrol cars lined the parking lot, officers marked grids on hand-drawn maps, and a command post buzzed inside the cafeteria. Parents arrived in waves, frantic and pale, clutching their children close as rumors spread faster than facts. The official search began at dawn. The first sweep targeted the thick woods behind the school, 60 acres of tangled brush, old logging paths and shallow creeks swallowed by fog. Volunteers fanned out beside uniformed officers, calling Evelyn's and Daniel's names into the gray morning. The air felt heavy, the kind that carried a hint of decay, even though nothing had yet been found. A deputy flagged down Rourke around mid-morning. "We found footprints," he announced, but as Rourke followed him to a muddy trail, hope shrank. The prints were smeared, rain-warped, likely hours or days old. No direction, no identity. Could be anyone, Rourke muttered. Still, the team logged the find clinging to any trace, even if meaningless. By noon, search crews moved to the narrow drainage tunnels running beneath the rear athletic field. Flashlights strobed through the dark, revealing dripping pipes, graffiti from years of bored teenagers, and stagnant puddles that reflected trembling beams of light. One officer shouted, "Something here!" Rourke crouched beside him. A torn piece of fabric lay half submerged in muddy water. Thin. Blue. Daniel's jacket had been blue. He lifted it carefully, letting water drip back into the tunnel. But the fabric wasn't denim. It was polyester. A janitor's uniform scrap, likely ripped long before. Another dead end. While ground teams searched outside, detectives visited the families. Daniel's mother, Linda Cole, stood in her doorway trembling. Her eyes were swollen, and the house behind her looked frozen in time, curtains half open, TV muted. A plate of uneaten food still on the table. "He wasn't supposed to stay after school yesterday," she whispered. "He didn't tell me he was meeting Ms. Hart." Rourke responded softly. "She said he'd been troubled, that he felt someone was following him." Linda's breath caught. "He mentioned footsteps. Weeks ago. I thought it was just teenage nerves." Rourke noticed the guilt tightening her jaw, her fingers twisting the hem of her cardigan, as if trying to anchor herself. She led them to Daniel's room, tidy, small, decorated with sketches pinned to the wall. His sketchbook lay open on the desk. On the last page, dark pencil strokes formed a hallway. Long, narrow, with a figure standing at the end. A figure with no face. Rourke closed the book gently. "We'll find him," he said. Though certainty felt far away, Evelyn's home told a different story. Detectives found no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no missing valuables. But one detail stood out: an empty slot on her bookshelf where a small, reel-to-reel tape recorder should have been. Her sister, Margaret, arrived breathlessly, jacket soaked from rain. She used that recorder for lesson notes, she said, scanning the living room with trembling hands. It was always here. Rourke exchanged a look with his partner. Daniel had heard footsteps. Evelyn had been on edge. And now her recording device was gone, taken or used. Margaret noticed the detective's concern and added, "She told me someone kept calling the school phone and hang up. Said it happened 3 times in 1 week." Another piece of a puzzle that still made no shape. By the 3rd day, speculation replaced reason. Some whispered Evelyn and Daniel ran away together. Others insisted a stalker had been hiding on school grounds. A few students claimed room 12 had always been strange, its lights flickering, cold spots appearing in the far corner. Detective Rourke ignored the noise. He worked evidence. Not ghosts, but the truth remained. No bodies, no witnesses, no solid leads. Every clue dissolved upon inspection, like the rain washing away footprints in the mud. On the 4th morning, as hope thinned, a sergeant approached Rourke with a clipboard. "We've covered 20 square miles. Forest, streams, tunnels, nothing." Rourke rubbed his forehead. "We're missing something. They didn't just vanish." But as the town's anxiety peaked, the search was scaled down. Media vans departed. Volunteers returned home. The case that began with so much urgency slowly sagged under the weight of nothingness. That evening, Rourke walked the hallway of the English wing alone. He stopped at room 12. The door stood exactly as it had that first morning, quiet, still, almost watchful. And then he realized something. The basement master key, used to open every maintenance access point beneath the school, was missing from the custodial key log. It had been checked out, but never checked back in. From the day before the disappearance, Rourke's pulse kicked up. Someone had been in the school that night. And whoever took that key had just become the first real suspect in a case that was rapidly slipping into darkness. Detective Rourke held the missing basement key log in his hands well past midnight. The single unreturned key pulled the day before the disappearance was the closest thing to a lead they had. But without fingerprints, witnesses, or surveillance footage from 1974, the discovery felt like a whisper of truth swallowed by time. For weeks, officers searched the school's basement, a maze of old boiler rooms, forgotten storage closets, and low-ceilinged passages lined with rusted pipes. Dust clung to their clothing. Flashlights cut through stagnant air, but no Evelyn and no Daniel were found. The key had opened doors, just not the right one. Rain turned to snow. Autumn became winter. The town's hope thinned like the gray sky hanging above it. By early 1976, the investigation was exhausted. Rourke sat before the county review board. The case file thick but hollow, pages full of detail and devoid of answers. The board members spoke in careful, bureaucratic tones, their words wrapped in polite resignation. "With no new evidence," one said, "and no credible suspect, we have no basis to proceed," another finished. The case was marked inactive. Not solved, not dismissed, simply placed into a drawer where unsolved things go to fade. When Rourke stepped outside into the bitter February air, he felt the weight of failure settle into his bones. He had witnessed many endings in his career, but this one left an ache he couldn't name. Asterisk for the Cole family. The closure meant nothing. Daniel's mother, Linda, kept his room exactly as it was, sketchbook on the desk, jacket on the chair, bed neatly made. She woke up each morning expecting to hear his footsteps, his voice asking for lunch money, the scrape of his chair. But the house remained unbearably silent. Neighbors brought casseroles, flowers, and sympathy. None of it filled the empty doorway where Daniel once stood. Linda stopped sleeping through the night. She wandered the hallway, checking the front door lock repeatedly, as if expecting it to open with Daniel standing there, cold, hungry, alive. Grief made the house feel smaller and her chest tighter. Across town, Evelyn Hart's sister, Margaret, boxed up her belongings with trembling hands. Evelyn's teaching awards, papers marked in her neat red ink. A sweater still carrying her perfume all tucked away, though Margaret paused often, pressing items to her chest just to feel something familiar. People told her to move on. But how do you move on when the world forgets quicker than you can grieve? Margaret moved 2 states away, unable to bear walking past the school where her sister taught with such pride. Asterisk. Bradley High School quietly removed Room 12 from the class schedule entirely. By autumn of 1977. The custodial staff replaced the door with a plain wooden panel and turned the classroom into a storage space. Desks were stacked haphazardly, textbooks piled in dusty corners, and no one, not students, not teachers, stepped inside again. Some said the room felt cold no matter the season. Others said the lights flickered even when the power was stable. Most simply avoided it. The chalkboard, with its final message, "Don't open the door," was scrubbed clean. But students still whispered the words during lunch, as if the phrase had become a permanent part of the building's bones. Asterisk. Rourke stayed on the force, but the case lived behind his eyes. He carried copies of the room photographs in his coat pocket, especially the one of the clock at 4:17 p.m. He told himself he would reopen the file someday. But years blurred. Decades passed. Bradley High School aged, its bricks cracking, its paint peeling. Most who remembered the case moved away or simply buried it in memory. That is, until 2021. When a demolition crew returned to the long-abandoned wing and found Room 12's replacement doors still stuck locked from the inside. The past, it seemed, had been waiting patiently. And when authorities broke it open at last, the truth Evelyn and Daniel left behind finally began to breathe again. 47 years passed, but in Milford, time didn't heal, it only hardened the silence. The old school building still stood on North Elm Street, its brick walls cracked, its windows boarded over, and its once bright hallways choked with dust. Locals avoided it. Teenagers dared each other to touch its rusted front gate, and the elderly crossed the street rather than walk beside the fence. The building wasn't abandoned. It was avoided like a wound the town refused to reopen. For decades, the disappearance of Miss Harper and Daniel Price lived on in whispered conversations and late-night theories. Every few years, a documentary crew came hunting for a new angle, only to leave with more questions. The case had been declared officially closed in the late 70s, but no one believed the story ended there. Something still felt unfinished, especially to the people who remembered the teacher's gentle smile and the boy's awkward shyness. Then, in the spring of 2021, everything changed. The Milford School District announced renovation plans for the old building. The goal was simple: tear down unsafe walls, rebuild classrooms, and convert the structure into an adult learning center. On paper, it was just a construction project. But to the townspeople, it felt like someone was prying open a coffin. News of the renovation spread quickly, and with it came old anxieties. Parents who had once been classmates of Daniel asked the same questions they'd whispered 40 years earlier. What really happened that day? What if something is still inside that room? The renovation sparked arguments at town hall meetings. Some insisted the building should be demolished completely. Others claimed opening it up might finally bring closure. Tension grew when the district announced that Classroom 204, the same room the police had sealed in 1974, would be fully cleared out and remodeled. For decades, the door had been locked, untouched. Now workers would break it open. The news reached people far beyond the town, including someone who had tried for years to stop thinking about the case. Detective Raymond Hawley. He'd been a rookie officer in '74. Just 23, full of certainty and idealism. The Harper Price case had taken both from him. Even after retirement, he carried the weight of it like he'd abandoned two people trapped in a story without an ending. When he heard the school was being opened, he drove back to Milford without hesitation. He didn't call ahead. He didn't ask permission. Something in his chest told him he needed to be there. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the sense that after nearly half a century, the truth was finally ready to step out of the dark. Workers began clearing the lower floors first. Hawley watched from behind the caution tape as debris rolled out in metal dumpsters, broken desks, cracked tiles, stacks of soggy textbooks. The air smelled of sawdust and wet plaster. Reporters gathered in small clusters, hoping this renovation might spark a new headline. But Hawley wasn't interested in publicity. He cared only about one room. Classroom 204. The foreman told him they'd reach the second floor by the end of the week. Some workers joked nervously about ghosts. Others refused to work evenings. Strange things, they said, were already happening inside drafts where windows were boarded. Faint tapping sounds in empty halls. Hawley didn't laugh. He just stared up at the shuttered windows of the old classroom, feeling the past stare back, and as the first hammer struck the stairwell railing, sending echoes up to the sealed second floor, he knew deep inside that something long hidden was about to break loose. Something that would change the story forever. The second floor of the abandoned school had always carried a strange quiet, but on the morning workers finally reached it, the silence felt heavier, almost watchful. Dust drifted through beams of pale sunlight slipping between the boarded windows, settling on lockers that hadn't been opened in nearly half a century. Every footstep echoed like an intrusion. Detective Hawley stood at the top of the stairwell, his gaze fixed on the dark hallway leading toward classroom 204. The hammering and drilling downstairs had stopped. The building hummed with an uneasy stillness, almost as if it were holding its breath. The foreman joined him, wiping sweat and plaster from his brow. "We'll start on this floor today," he said. "But some of the guys, they're uneasy. Said they heard tapping last night, coming from inside 204. Hawley didn't respond. He'd felt the same sense of pressure the moment he'd walked into the building. Like a memory trying to push its way forward, the workers spread out, pulling down ceiling tiles and prying open cabinets in other rooms before approaching the sealed door. Classroom 204 sat at the very end of the hall, just as Hawley remembered, its door chained and marked by the original police-issued padlock, its handle wrapped in rust like dried blood. Everything about it looked frozen in 1974. "Cut the lock," the foreman said. The grinder sparked to life. The growling metal-on-metal sound ricocheted off the empty walls, sending vibrations through the hall. Hawley closed his eyes, hearing in those sparks the echoes of the past, the screaming students, the frantic teachers, the officers whispering theories they never dared write down. Finally, the lock snapped open. A worker pulled the chain loose, and the foreman pushed the door. It resisted, just slightly, like something inside was pushing back. Then it gave way with a groan. A rush of stale, trapped air spilled into the hallway, carrying the scent of old paper and something faintly metallic. Dust swirled, revealing the outlines of desks perfectly preserved in their last known pattern. A chalkboard covered in faint remnants of equations. A lone sweater slumped over a chair Daniels, Hawley instantly recognized. He felt a tightening in his throat. The workers stepped in first, their boots leaving tracks through nearly 5 decades of dust. "Nothing here," one muttered. "Just old furniture," but Hawley wasn't convinced. He scanned every detail, searching for the disturbance, the wrongness that had drawn him here. Then someone called out, "Sir, you need to see this." The voice came from the far corner of the room, near the radiator. Hawley walked over slowly, noticing a faint indentation in the dust. An object previously concealed by a fallen poster board had been revealed, a small rectangular metal box no bigger than a lunch container. Its surface was scorched in places, its edges unnaturally sharp, and on its lid was a symbol no one in the room recognized. A perfect circle intersected by 3 straight lines, like a crude compass. It wasn't listed in the original evidence logs, Holly said quietly. Nothing like this was ever mentioned. One of the workers nudged it lightly with his boot. The metal rang with a sound that didn't match its size, too deep, too heavy, almost resonant. Careful. Holly snapped. He crouched and touched the box lightly. It was warm dot in a room sealed for 47 years. His pulse quickened. Nobody touches this. Nobody opens it. Not yet. The foreman frowned. What do you think it is? I don't know, Holly admitted. But it shouldn't be here. And it definitely shouldn't feel like it was placed here recently. A strange unease settled over the room. Even the workers stepped back as Holly lifted the box with both hands. He felt a vibration run through it, as if something inside shifted. Not a rattle. Something slower, intentional. He swallowed hard. Whatever this object was, it hadn't been waiting to be found. It had been waiting to be opened. And as Holly carried it out of the classroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real nightmare of the Harper Price case wasn't behind them. It was just beginning. Detective Holly didn't sleep that night. The metal box sat on his dining table wrapped in an evidence cloth, vibrating faintly every few minutes like a heartbeat trapped inside steel. He had replayed the discovery again and again, its warmth, its weight, the feeling that it had been placed, not forgotten. By morning, one truth pressed relentlessly on his mind. Someone alive knew more about the disappearance of Emily Carter and Daniel Price than the original investigation had ever revealed, and someone had kept that box hidden for 47 years. Schools reopening had stirred the town's memory. Rumors resurfaced like old wounds reopening. Holly started with the people who had been closest to the classroom in 1974, beginning with retired teacher Eleanor Briggs, the last known adult to see Emily and Daniel alive. Eleanor lived alone in a small cedar cabin on the outskirts of town. The moment Holly stepped inside, her eyes darted to the evidence bag tucked under his arm. Something in her face shifted, not surprise, but recognition stifled by fear. "You found something," she whispered. "We did." Holly kept his voice low. A box inside the sealed classroom. Something that wasn't in the police reports. Eleanor sank slowly into her armchair. "I knew this day might come," she murmured. "But I prayed it wouldn't." Holly leaned forward. "Miss Briggs, the school was sealed for decades. That room was locked from the outside. Whatever was in there remained untouched. And yet this object wasn't there when officers did their initial walkthrough." Her eyes glistened. "You don't understand. They didn't tell you everything." "They who?" "The administration. The district. Even the police chief at the time." Her voice trembled. "Everyone wanted the investigation closed. The town couldn't afford another scandal." Holly felt a cold weight settle in his chest. "So they suppressed evidence?" Eleanor shook her head, then nodded, contradiction tightening her expression. "They didn't suppress it. They replaced it." She looked at him directly now. Emily and Daniel weren't just missing. Someone wanted them forgotten. Her confession cracked open a fissure in the case. Holly pressed gently. "Why? What were they trying to hide?" Eleanor hesitated a long time, wringing her hands. "Emily came to me the week before she disappeared. She said she was hearing things in that room. Whispers, knocking behind the walls. Daniel told me he saw someone standing at the back of the classroom after hours. A man he didn't recognize." Holly felt his breath hitch. "A man?" "Yes, but when Daniel pointed, the figure was gone. Poof." Her voice dimmed. "I told them it was stress. Exams were coming. Teen imaginations run wild. I didn't listen. That is my greatest regret." The contradiction gnawed at Holly. Emily and Daniel were described as perfectly normal students in all official records. No signs of stress or hallucinations. Yet here was a teacher admitting she'd ignored their fear. "Why didn't you testify to this in 1974? He asked. Eleanor gave a defeated smile. "The principal told me if I spread panic, I'd lose my job. And the chief said there was no evidence, that the rumors would harm the search." She looked down. "I believed them, and I stayed silent." "But this man Daniel saw," Holly persisted. "Did you ever learn who he was?" Eleanor's silence lasted almost a full minute. "Yes," she whispered finally. "But not until years later." Before Haile could ask further, her breath hitched and tears welled. "Detective, I think he's still here." She pointed weakly toward the covered box on Hale's lap. "That symbol on the lid, I've seen it before." Hale's pulse spiked. "Where?" She motioned toward a drawer beside her chair. Halle opened it. Inside lay a stack of old yearbooks. Between 2 pages, he found a hand-drawn circle intersected by 3 lines, the exact symbol etched onto the metal box. "Daniel drew that," Eleanor said. "The day before he vanished. Said it kept appearing on the chalkboard when no one was looking." Halle stared at the symbol, its ink smudged by time. "A pattern emerging. A connection forming, Ms. Briggs," he said quietly. "I need to know what you didn't tell the investigators." She exhaled, exhausted. "There's something else. Something I kept hidden all these years." Halle braced himself. Then she spoke. "It wasn't just a man Daniel saw. Emily saw him too. And he wasn't a stranger." Her next words would reshape everything. He worked at the school. And with that revelation, everything inside Halle sharpened. The contradictions weren't random. They were deliberate. And behind them lay the person who had wanted the classroom sealed forever. Halle left Eleanor Briggs's cabin with her final words, echoing in his mind. He worked at the school. It was the first time in 47 years that the suspect pool had narrowed to a single, chilling category: someone trusted, someone with keys, someone who could walk the hallways unseen, and someone who knew that Classroom 204 held a secret worth burying. Back at the station, Halle went through the employment records from 1973 to 1975. Most of the names were familiar: teachers who had aged into retirement, janitors long deceased, a principal who had died in 1989. But one name stood out with a faint pencil mark beside it: Charles Rendell, maintenance staff. Halle felt a ripple run across his spine. Rendell had vanished the same year Emily and Daniel disappeared. He'd left no forwarding address, no family contact, no tax records after 1974. It was as if he had stepped off the map. Or been erased from it. Halle requested Rendell's personnel file. Most pages were ordinary schedules, payroll, evaluations. But at the back was something unusual: a floor plan of the school, drawn by hand, edges browned with age. And on that map, a series of lines and arrows pointed to a location beneath the building. A room that was never listed in official construction documents. It was labeled simply B12. Halle stared at it. "Basement 12, he whispered. There were only 6 known basement rooms in the entire school. Why did Rendell draw a 12th? The blueprint showed the entrance was located beneath room 12 on the first floor, a classroom that had been converted into a storage space decades earlier. He grabbed his keys. If Eleanor's confession had opened the door, this blueprint pushed him into the darkness beyond it. The school was empty by the time Halle arrived. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the cracked tiles. The building's hum felt different tonight, almost as if it sensed his purpose. Room 12 sat at the far end of the west wing, its door unmarked. He switched on his flashlight and stepped inside. Dust-coated old desks, broken chairs, and stacks of unused textbooks. The air was thick with the smell of damp plaster and forgotten years. Halle moved slowly. comparing the blueprint with the room's layout. According to Rendell's map, the entrance to B12 wasn't a door. It was a hatch, hidden beneath the teacher's desk. He pushed the desk aside. A scraping sound rang out as wood slid across concrete. And there, beneath it, barely visible under decades of grime, was a metal square, a latch. Heart pounding, Hawley knelt and brushed away the dust. The hatch was sealed with 2 rusted bolts. He used a crowbar from his kit, the metal groaning as he wrenched the bolts free. The air grew colder as he worked. Like something below was exhaling. The second bolt snapped loose. Hawley pulled the hatch open. A breath of icy, stale air washed over him, carrying a faint chemical scent, sharp, sterile, preserved by time. His flashlight revealed a narrow set of steps leading down into darkness. The walls were concrete, the air silent. This room was not part of any school design he had ever seen. Taking a slow breath, Hawley descended. The basement chamber was smaller than he expected, barely the size of a storage closet. The floor was littered with old boxes, broken equipment, and something that made Hawley freeze. A wooden stool. And beside it, a long metal table with restraints built into its sides. He felt his stomach twist. This wasn't a storage room. It was an observation chamber. His flashlight caught something else, a smear of red on the far wall. Old but still recognizable, shaped like a hand that had dragged downward. Hawley swallowed hard. The building whispered with memories. He spotted another object on the floor, a torn piece of fabric, blue and stiff with age. It matched the shade of Daniel Price's missing sweater. Hawley crouched, lifting the fabric carefully into a fresh evidence bag. Then his light landed on something tucked beneath the table, another metal box. Identical shape, identical symbol etched into the lid. But this one was open. Empty. His pulse thundered. If the box upstairs had been sealed, but this one had already been used, then whatever secret Rendell and whoever came after him wanted hidden wasn't just buried. It had been moved. Recently. Hawley stared into the darkness between the shelves. A cold realization tightening in his chest. Someone else had been here, and they might still be watching. Hawley left the hidden chamber beneath room 12 with his pulse still hammering in his ears, the cold air of the basement clinging to his jacket like something alive. The image of the open metal box, identical to the sealed one upstairs, would not leave his mind. Someone had been down there. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and someone who had returned long after the case had gone cold. Back at the station, the evidence bags were logged and sealed immediately. The torn fabric from Daniel's sweater, the photos of the chamber, the second metal box, every piece felt like a puzzle fragment cut from a larger, darker story. But Hawley sensed that the next missing piece wasn't hidden underground. It was buried in paper, lost in bureaucracy. Or deliberately erased. He headed straight to the archives. The file room felt colder than usual. Rows of steel cabinets hummed under flickering fluorescent lights. Hawley pulled the original 1974 case file, a thick beige folder marked Harper Price, Disappearance, and carried it to the long metal table at the center of the room. He spread the contents out: photographs, statements, attendance records, preliminary crime scene sketches, old interview notes typed on yellowing paper. And then he found it. A second, slimmer folder inside the primary case file labeled Restricted Administrative Review. O&L. Hale frowned. This folder wasn't in the digital scan. It wasn't in the chain of custody inventory. It didn't exist on any official list. He opened it carefully. The first page was a memorandum dated June 18, 1974, 4 days after Emily and Daniel disappeared. It was signed by Principal Marlon Gates and Police Chief Alden Price. Certain interview details have been deemed inconclusive or potentially damaging to public confidence. These statements are to be stored separately until further notice. Hale's jaw tightened. until further notice. Often means never revisited. He turned to the next page. A witness statement, redacted, thick. Black bars covered entire paragraphs. Only the first few lines were legible. I saw someone go into room 204 after hours. Not a student. Not a teacher. Holly leaned closer. 3 words under. The bars were circled in faded red ink. The man. Downstairs. His breath caught. Downstairs. As. In the basement. As in the room he had just discovered. He flipped to the next page. Another redacted interview. This one from a custodian who worked the evening shift. Again. Nearly all text was blacked out, except a single surviving sentence at the bottom. Rendell said the noise wasn't rats. He said the walls were moving again. Holly felt a chill creep up his spine. What walls? The basement walls? The walls in classroom 204? Or somewhere else entirely? The third document was a disciplinary note on Charles Rendell himself. Handwritten, rushed, almost frantic. It mentioned unauthorized access, after-hours activity near room 12, and a chilling final remark: if he continues this behavior, we may need to notify the families. But no notification ever happened. No record ever followed. Rendell vanished, the children vanished, and the school sealed the room. The last item in the folder wasn't a document at all. It was a photograph. Old. Grainy, taken from a hallway security camera that no longer existed. Holly held it closer to the light. Room 12. The night of the disappearance. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway, blurry. Tall, shoulders slumped at an unnatural angle. And though the face was lost to distortion, one detail was unmistakable. He was carrying something, a small rectangular object. Metallic. Box shape. Holly stared at the photo until the edges blurred. Someone had removed this folder from the official file. Someone had redacted the interviews. Someone had protected the man who may have taken Emily and Daniel. The truth wasn't lost. It was hidden. And now Holly had proof that someone inside the system helped keep it buried. He closed the file slowly. His heartbeat steady, focused, resolute. Whoever erased those pages, whoever walked down that hallway in 1974, whoever opened the first metal box, they were still out there. And Holly was finally catching up.
The photograph of the hallway lingered in Hale's mind long after he left the archives. The grainy figure, the slumped shoulders, the metallic object clutched in one hand. The image felt like a ghost finally stepping back into the light. He didn't know if the man was Charles Rendell or someone else entirely, but one detail refused to let go. The timestamp. 11:46 p.m. The night Emily and Daniel vanished. Whoever that figure was, he wasn't fleeing. He was returning to room 12, and he was carrying the same kind of box Hale had just recovered upstairs. By sundown, the school had emptied again, leaving only the hum of generators and the distant echo of construction tools cooling in the dark. Hale returned with the redacted folder tucked under his arm, the sealed metal box locked in his evidence case, and a tightening sense that something inside the building was waiting for him, waiting for the door to open. He walked the hallway slowly, flashlight beams slicing through the dim. Every sound, the creak of settling wood, the whisper of loose ceiling tiles, felt heightened, like the building itself was aware of him. He reached the end of the corridor. Classroom 204, the place where everything began. The police seal had been cut earlier that morning after the workers found the metal box, but they'd left the door pulled shut. Hale's fingers hesitated at the handle. Even after all these years, the room felt like a boundary. Crossing it meant acknowledging that the case was no longer just a cold file. It was alive. He pushed the door open. A soft groan echoed through the hallway, as if the hinges remembered a sound they'd been forced to forget. Hale stepped inside. The dust patterns from earlier were still visible, but something was different. The air. It felt warmer now, subtly, unnervingly, as if the room had been occupied recently, or as if the sealed box had released some lingering presence when it was removed. Hale scanned the room, retracing the worker's steps, the overturned poster board, the gap near the radiator, the faint indentation in the dust where the box had once rested. But then he saw it, a fresh footprint, right in the middle of the floor, not from a worker, not from him. The tread pattern was smaller, narrower, almost like a dress shoe. Hale crouched, heart beating sharply. Someone else was here, he whispered. He lifted his flashlight and the beam struck the front wall. Something new had appeared on the chalkboard, a symbol, drawn in white chalk, slightly crooked but unmistakable. A perfect circle intersected by 3 straight lines. Hale's chest tightened. No, that wasn't here before. The symbol matched the one etched onto the metal boxes. The same one Eleanor Briggs recognized. The same one Daniel had drawn in his yearbook the day before he disappeared. Someone had opened the door. Someone had walked inside. Someone had redrawn the past. Hale took a shaky breath and examined the chalk residue more closely. It hadn't been smudged by time or moisture. The lines were crisp. It had been drawn today. He stepped back, eyes darting across the walls. A subtle shifting of air brushed past him, warmer than the surrounding cold. He felt it against his neck, like a presence moving just outside the flashlight's reach. Then the light flickered. For a second, just long enough to feel like an intentional blink, the flashlight dimmed and brightened again. Hale steadied himself and turned toward the door. It was open. He was certain he'd left it partly closed when he entered. Now it stood half a foot wider, as if someone, or something, had nudged it. Hale tightened his grip on the flashlight. "Who's here?" His voice echoed against the barren walls. Silence. He took one step back when his foot brushed against something near the front row of desks. He looked down. A folded piece of paper. Old, yellowed, the edges brittle. It hadn't been on the floor during the morning entry. Hale picked it up carefully and unfolded it. A note, written in faint pencil. Room 12 isn't the end. He opens the door from below. Hale's breath quickened. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, but readable. A signature sat at the bottom. Daniel Price. Hale staggered back, gripping the paper hard enough it nearly tore. This wasn't a note that had been left untouched for 47 years. The pencil marks were too sharp, too fresh. Someone had placed this here, recently. He rushed to the doorway, scanning the hall left to right. It was empty, silent, still. But the footprint, the symbol, the note, they all pointed to one truth. Someone was moving through the building with knowledge of places Hale had only just uncovered. Someone who knew the basement. Someone who knew the boxes. Someone who had once walked this hallway at 11:46 p.m. And now they weren't hiding. They were inviting. The door to classroom 204 creaked again, as though responding to a presence Hale couldn't yet see. For the first time, he felt it clearly. The case was no longer reopening. It was waking up. For a long moment, no one in the dimly lit hallway outside room 12 spoke. The silence that followed the mysterious opening of the classroom door felt heavier than anything the investigators had endured in decades. Detective Maren Ortiz kept her flashlight trained on the entrance, half expecting the door to close again on its own, just as it had all those years ago. But it didn't. It remained open, wide and still, like it had simply been waiting for someone to return. Ortiz swallowed hard and stepped inside. The classroom was exactly as it had been described in the old case files. Dust-coated desks, textbooks left mid-lesson, a chalkboard frozen in time with half-erased white smudges. But now, something else stood out. Something that hadn't been there before. Near the teacher's desk was a narrow stack of folders tied with rotting string, their edges curled and darkened with age. She knelt. "These weren't here last time the room was searched," she murmured. Behind her, Deputy Harris shook his head. "Ma'am, This room was thoroughly cleared in 1974, again in 1992, and again when the building was closed in 2011. There's no record of these. Ortiz touched the top folder carefully. The brittle paper crumbled slightly under her glove. Someone wanted them hidden somewhere. No one would dare look again. She untied the string. Inside the first folder were photographs, dozens of them, black and white, many blurred, many overexposed. But the subjects were unmistakable. Mr. Alan Pierce and Emily Carter, the missing teacher and student. Some were taken in class, some in the hallway, and some in the basement below, room 12. Ortiz's breath hitched. These are surveillance photos. Harris frowned. But who was watching them? The answer came from the second folder. This one held written reports, observations dated weeks before the disappearance, each signed only with the initials DR. The reports described unusual behavior, coded phrases like unapproved experiments and behavioral responses inconsistent with prior patterns. The tone was clinical, detached, disturbingly precise. Ortiz read further, her eyebrows slowly tightening. The report suggested that Pierce and Emily were being monitored, not for disciplinary reasons, but for something far more controlled, far more secretive. The entries mentioned stage 3 approaches, baseline disruptions, and repeated references to the door, capitalized, as if it were not a literal object, but a designated program. "Ma'am," Harris pointed at the last page. "Look at the signature." Ortiz lifted the sheet. The final report included a full name this time, Dr. Richard M. Hale. She froze. "Hale, as in Superintendent Hale, the one who ordered the case closed?" Harris nodded slowly, realization spreading across his face. He wasn't just a superintendent, he was the program lead. Ortiz closed the folder, heart pounding. The pieces were beginning to align into something far darker than a kidnapping, far stranger than a runaway case. Whatever Pierce and Emily had been involved in, it wasn't accidental. And the school administration had buried it so thoroughly that every adult from that era either denied it or seemed terrified to speak. Ortiz moved to the final folder, the thickest, its cover marked only with a faded red stamp. Classified, do not disclose inside. She found transcripts, audio logs, converted to paper. Recordings labeled Room 12, After Hours. One transcript stood out. The date was the night before the disappearance. In it, Alan Pierce's voice trembled as he spoke. "If what you're saying is true, then Room 12 is not just a room. No, I can't write that down. Not yet. Not until I'm certain we can protect Emily." Another voice replied, female, shaky but determined. "Emily. Mr. Pierce. I saw the door move on its own again. I heard the whispering. We can't keep pretending. Someone else knows." Pierce answered, "Then tomorrow we tell them. All of them. No more secrets." The transcript ended there, but the next page was blank, completely empty. Except for a single handwritten line at the bottom corner, scribbled with urgency. "They won't let us talk. If someone finds this, finish what we started." Ortiz exhaled shakily. She felt the air shift, like the room itself was listening. Harris whispered, "Detective, what does this mean?" "It means," she said, standing, "someone silenced them before they could reveal the truth, and whoever hid these files expected the secret to stay buried forever." She turned back toward the open classroom door. "But the door opened again," she added quietly. "And I think it's telling us it's time." Outside, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Footsteps neither Ortiz nor Harris recognized. Ortiz's pulse quickened. "Someone else is here," she whispered. And for the first time since reopening the cold case, she understood. They weren't just uncovering a mystery. They were disturbing something that had been waiting. Detective Maren Ortiz froze where she stood, every muscle tightening at the sound of footsteps drifting through the hallway outside room 12. They were slow, dragging slightly, as if whoever was approaching wasn't in a hurry, yet carried a purpose that made the air in the old school feel suddenly thinner. Harris instinctively reached for his holster. "Stay behind me," he whispered, though Ortiz didn't move. Instead, she carefully slid the classified folders back into the desk drawer they had been hidden in, leaving it half open, ready to retrieve again if necessary. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched. Then, as if nothing had ever disturbed it, the faint hum of the flickering overhead lights took over again. "Whoever it was," Harris muttered, "they're not coming in." Ortiz didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her flashlight and cast its beam across the classroom. Something had changed. The scattered papers, the chalk dust, even the stale smell of the abandoned room felt heavier. Charged. Like the place had inhaled the truth uncovered in Chapter 11 and was now holding its breath. She stepped toward the chalkboard. A thin layer of dust covered its surface, untouched for years. But now, as she leaned closer, she noticed faint marks beneath the dust letters, nearly invisible. "Get me some light from the side," she said. Harris angled his flashlight, letting the beam skim across the board. The indented grooves became clear. Ortiz whispered the words out loud. "We tried to warn them." Harris took a step back. "No way. There's no record of anyone entering this room since the school closed." Ortiz pressed her finger against the grooves. The indentations were old, but the pattern of dust around them was not. It had settled unevenly, as if the board had been touched recently disturbed. Like someone had traced the message again, or like someone wanted them to find it tonight. She turned away from the board, scanning the room again. The student desks looked ordinary, perfectly still, yet she felt watched, not by a person, but by the space itself. Rooms that hold secrets too long develop a presence, a kind of echo that isn't heard with ears, but felt beneath the ribs. Her phone buzzed. A message from the tech team downtown. "Found something on Hale. Urgent. Call back immediately." The superintendent. The man who had buried the original investigation. The signature on all the redactions. Ortiz locked her jaw. "We'll call them in a minute. First, we need to know why this room keeps reacting to us." Harris frowned. "Reacting?" She walked to the windows. All three panes were fogged from the inside. She wiped one with her sleeve and saw nothing but the dark schoolyard beyond. But as her fingers pressed against the cold surface, she felt a vibration, subtle, rhythmic, like a pulse. She snapped her hand back. "Something's off," she whispered. Harris swallowed. "Ma'am, this is an old building, pipes, wiring. These vibrations aren't mechanical." When she turned, she noticed the classroom door. It had been wide open minutes ago. Now it stood half closed. Harris's voice trembled. "Did you touch that?" "No." The door creaked softly, as if nudged by an unseen hand, moving just an inch enough to make her heart hammer harder. Ortiz forced herself to breathe, then approached the teacher's desk. The top folder she had opened earlier, the one with Pierce and Emily's surveillance photographs, was still partly exposed. She lifted one of the images again and held it under her flashlight. Emily stood beside the teacher's desk, looking not at Pierce, but toward the chalkboard. Her eyes, even blurred by age, were wide with fear. Behind her, just barely visible, was a shape. Not a person, not clearly human. A shadow that didn't align with anything in the room, Ortiz whispered. She saw something they couldn't explain. Harris stepped closer. "Detective, you need to see this." He pointed to the far left corner of the room. A faint outline, barely a discoloration on the floor, formed a rectangle. An old trapdoor frame, sealed long ago. "We searched the basement," Harris said, "but if there was another way down, Pierce and Emily might have been taken through here," Ortiz finished. "Or they had gone willingly, drawn by something." She crouched, running her glove along the wood. It was warped, but there, under her fingers, she felt a notch. A recessed handle. Painted over decades ago, someone hadn't just sealed it. Someone had tried to erase it. The classroom lights flickered violently. Both detectives spun around. On the chalkboard, letters appeared. slowly, as if drawn by invisible chalk. "Don't open it." Harris stumbled back. "No, no, this is not possible." Ortiz stared at the message, chest tight, pulse hammering like a drum. But she didn't look away. "Whatever happened," she whispered, "it's still happening. And someone, something, is trying to warn us." She placed her hand on the trapdoor and felt it move beneath her palm. Just once. Just enough. She looked at Harris. "Call the team. Tell them we're opening this, tonight." The chalkboard responded instantly. A final message scratched itself into the dust. "If you do, you'll see what we saw." Ortiz swallowed and lifted the trapdoor.